All right, before we get started, we always want to do a member spotlight. This time we are spotlighting our member Concept Design Studio. They have designed and oversaw the construction of an affordable housing Green Star Silver certified all-electric in-unit multifamily development right in Lansing, Michigan. 2 different buildings. So hats off to Concept Studio and their work. And this is who GHI members are. This is what GHI members do. And so can you. Sign up over at greenhomeinstitute.org, become a member. All right, well, welcome everyone to Great Data, Great Decisions from Energy to Carbon Ratings and the Inflation Reduction Act. Before we get started, we want to say thanks to our top tier sponsor, Mitsubishi. This just came out, super exciting, Consumers Reports. And it said of the 25 brands of air conditioning for reliability and satisfaction captured in their survey of consumers, only Mitsubishi scored excellent marks on both reliability and satisfaction. So very cool information there. And I can tell you, since I've had it in 2020, that's how I've felt. I've got the hyperheat scenario up here in Michigan where it gets very cold. So this works down to some of the lowest temperatures. It's a ducted system, so it's just swapped right out the box of my furnace, put in a heat pump, and the condenser sits outside, just like an air conditioning system. Now, if you're too nervous to go fully electric like I did, they do have the A coil now through the IntelliHeat. And so the outside box can be synced up with the old furnace for you or your client as well. And you can use it down, set it down to as low as a temperature you feel best for comfort and for your utility bills. With their new IntelliHeat. One thing I really like is that with the new Inflation Reduction Act rebates coming out, they try to make it very easy to help pair their indoor and outdoor units that match to get the 25 home C credit. And it will be a little bit different when the state credits come out. So watch out for that. Very well known for their mini split systems, super energy efficient, very affordable. Get rid of duct systems, don't have to deal with all the duct testing, which we'll talk about briefly today. If you don't like the look of it, you've got a lot of different systems that can be hidden behind the walls as well. And there's ducted mini splits that kind of give you the best of both worlds. For commercial buildings, they have their variable refrigerant flow VRF systems that can simultaneously heat, cool, and ventilate all at the same time. So check out MitsubishiComfort.com to learn more and utilize them for your project. And thanks to our second tier sponsor, Rockwool. They've got the Rockwool R class going on now. So you can check out some of the work that they're doing out in the field with mineral-based bats that can go under the slab and around the entire house as an alternative to foam insulation, if that's something you are interested in. All right, so before we get into our session here today, just a reminder that it's brought to you by the GreenHome Institute, and the GreenHome Institute is a nonprofit with a mission to empower people to make healthier and more sustainable choices in the renovation and construction of the places we live. We are a very small staff of 3, and my name is Brett Little. I'm the education manager here, and I'll be moderating today's session. Like all of our courses, this course is approved for multiple continuing education units, including the energy pillar within our certified green home professional designation. AIA, health, welfare, and safety, make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. And check out your Passive House, certified Passive House consultant code, as well for raters as well, coming your way after this session. I'm super excited to have our guest speaker here today. And before I get into it, just a reminder, we use energy rating programs in the US and now growing across the country. And I think it's now a good share of newly built homes are getting some sort of energy rating and label that is backed by the ANSI 301 standard, and to some extent the energy rating index is what we're going to talk about. This, of course, is going to line you up for utility rebates. We have a local utility here in Michigan that is giving out rebates, and many others based on this. Sometimes these line up with codes, so having these ratings done help you meet the codes. They also help you achieve the funds under the Inflation Reduction Act now. for certification to Energy Star Zero Energy Ready. So we're going to talk about that. And as far as the green programs, such as Lead for Homes go, Lead for Homes requires that you have, at minimum, compliance with DOE or the EPA's Energy Star program, which basically requires somewhere around an energy rating index of 75 or so through these programs. And so there's a very small number of entities that can deliver these. There's two specific ones in California. And so this is the way to meet the LEED prerequisite EA minimum energy performance, both in V4 and V4.1, typically used all the way up from single family to, we've seen even to sometimes in rare cases, a 6-story multifamily mid-rise building that had central units utilizing this approach. So if you're using the low-rise program for LEED, it's required to have a rating done backed by this ANSI standard. So we're going to talk a little bit more about it, how to achieve it, and growingly, as more international entities use LEED for homes, quite frankly, what we have found is there is not anything else available anywhere else on the planet that is well put together as we have in the US. And so these programs can now potentially be available outside of other countries or outside of the US. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So that is setting the stage here for our speaker today, Connor Dillon. And Connor, it's really exciting to have you here on your nearly first year anniversary of the Building Science Institute. So great to be celebrating that with you. And I will hand it off to you now so you can introduce yourself, BSI, and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Brett. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, I hope everyone can see what I see. So real quick, I do want to touch base on what it is we're going to talk about a little bit more. We're going to talk about energy and carbon ratings. We're going to talk about the state of data in the energy rating industry. And then I'm going to talk about the IRA, but as I have horrible puns, not that one. Sorry. So who am I, and why should you care about what I'm saying? So I am Connor Dillon. I'm the quality manager of Building Science Institute. We are one of 2 nationally recognized EPA home certification organizations. We do not participate in California, just to clarify that, because like Brett said, there are 2 specific ones for California. The rest of the country are covered by the other 2. At a high level, you should care about the issues I'm talking about if you're a publicly traded builder, because the data that's handed to you by your rater will go into a report to the SEC. Okay. And if the data is garbage or it lacks a certain level of attestation, you're probably going to be in trouble. Now, if you're a private builder and you're banking and selling yourself on energy efficiency, carbon reduction, and more, you might even be taking the data from the rater and putting it into a homegrown ESG report. You want to make sure that the raters aren't handing you crappy data that's being pencil whipped. And then obviously I saw in the chat, a lot of people are raters or building scientists, architects, and so on. You should frankly care that everyone meets professional standards for doing their job, which I know sounds kind of bizarre, but energy raters are not typically licensed by the state like architects, engineers, and so on. So there's kind of an imbalance there when it comes to professional requirements. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit 101, very basic stuff about energy ratings and carbon ratings. Okay, so like Brett mentioned, ANSI 301 is an American national standards that calculates an energy rating index. It also has 2 appendices. One talks about grading insulation, which covers all types of insulation, fibrous materials, spray foam, and radiant barrier. And then Appendix B basically just talks about what are the inspection procedures for minimum rated features. Okay. Now, one of the reasons you should care about ANSI 301 is directly referenced by both the Energy Star program and the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home program. Both of those directly reference those, and then other programs build upon them. So Lead for Homes references Energy Star, FIAS references Dozer. That's what I call it, by the way. I know some people say full thing. I just say Dozer. Beyond that, when it relates to energy code, the IECC does have the R406 compliance path, which is a snapshot of the ANSI 301 standard, and then they make tweaks and modifications. So just so we're keeping track, you've got the baseline ANSI 301 standard. It's always updated at least a minimum of twice a year through an ANSI addenda process. And then you have some variations as it relates to the energy code, where they basically take a snapshot and say, okay, it's 2015 snapshot of the standard, make a little modifications, and that's the 2015 IECC ERI. Same thing for 2018, 2021, and I suspect the same for 2024 going forward. There are also some proprietary versions of the standard where basically an organization, because it's an American national standard, it's publicly available. People can reference it. So what they do is they take the ANSI standard, they incorporate the ANSI addenda because you can't ignore those, and then they modify it a little bit further beyond that through their own standard system. So you do have that. Now, very, very important to note, every single one of these ERIs, just as a baseline, even for the code ERI, is required to go through a home energy rating system. Okay. That system is something that provides quality management oversight and training for the inspectors. It looks a few different ways depending on the organization you work with. But if you want an ERI, you have to go through a home energy rating system. Okay. Now, as it relates to carbon, okay, there are two important categories. We have operational carbon and embodied carbon. I'll talk about embodied carbon in a second, but I'm going to go ahead and start with operational, because ANSI 301 is not just an energy rating index calculation anymore. They did add an addenda, an ANSI addenda, that creates a CO2e rating index. And so that's an operational carbon index, similar in nature to an ERI for a house. It does not incorporate embodied carbon. So it's all about operating the actual operation of the house. That addenda is actually mandatory January 1, 2023. So all of the tools that are based on the ANSI 301 standard should be generating that. You should be able to get some kind of a report or a label of some kind out of the certificate, out of that program, so that way you can show whatever your CO2e rating index is.
Connor,
go ahead.
Is that so is that like an actual rating, like on a scale like the ERI, like
yes, yeah, just like the ERI, it does have a scale. So when we're talking about net, and it's operational, right? So net zero carbon on site, and that's the other thing. It's also site-based, not source-based, although source does play a part in it. So net zero operational carbon would be a 0, and then 100 is a reference home. Now, one interesting thing, the reference home is all electric. So you're going to get dinged pretty bad if you have natural gas. And so that's it's kind of important for people, especially, I live in Texas. Don't try and hunt me down, but you can find me very easily. Texas loves natural gas. A lot of states on my side of another bad joke, Mason-Dixon line, they love their natural gas and propane. So do keep that in mind, that the reference home is all electric. That is different from the ERI. I would say they share about 80% of the DNA, based on smarter people than me who've told me that. So, you consider 80%, and then there's a 20% difference where there's some frog DNA there to focus more in on the carbon aspect. So yeah, that's what I'll say on that.
Do you know, so obviously are these based on each grid that you're in? So like Texas, you have your own special grid, here in here in Michigan, we're on the MISO grid. So Does
Mhm.
that then change based on the makeup of the grid? And is that, like, I assume, kept up to date maybe?
It does
Yeah.
affect it. And I'm trying to remember exactly where they pull it from.
Hmm.
But yeah, it that is going to be an updated thing, but it is delayed.
Yeah.
There's, I can't remember if it's a year or 2 year gap based on
Hmm.
energy generation.
Yeah.
But the source energy does play a role in it.
Yeah.
From me playing around and bouncing test homes around the country, I
Yeah.
don't know that it makes a huge difference because it leans so much on the actual operational side of things.
Right.
So it's kind of a give or take. It does affect it, but I don't, maybe 2 or 3 points at most.
Okay.
So
And then I assume then that answers somewhat my next question, but maybe this is a future thing. I mean, is there where you're trying to get when you're designing these projects and you're trying to use time of use, right? Like
mhm,
maybe you have, just for an example, a smart appliance that can either you can program it to work at night, usually when the carbon
mhm,
is lower, or during the day if you're in a certain place like where you're
mhm.
at. There's probably a lot of sun on the grid to some extent. But
Yeah.
do you know if it'll ever factor in that kind of thing? Is that a plan maybe, or?
So to some degree it does already. Because one, it does incorporate battery storage on site,
Uh-huh.
power production on site, and then again, depending on whatever that time delay is when things get
Mm.
updated on that
Yeah.
end of the source production, then it will be incorporated.
Yeah.
So case in point, the specific place where I'm at now is actually powered by community solar.
Huh.
Um, Program.
Yeah.
So the local electric co-op, shout out to GBCI, they have a solar farm. So members were able to opt in. I want to say maybe it was 2018 or 2019. They were
Right.
able to opt in for the source to be solar, photovoltaic, or just wherever they normally buy their power. So
Yeah.
kind of fun thing here in Central Texas. But I'm biased.
Yeah, yeah. So it's so what I heard you say, because if I understand right, batteries, um, they're not typically factored into these energy ratings. They don't
Hmm.
show
Hmm.
up in the report. So now it kind of could, and it could
Hmm.
perhaps benefit it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so the battery is that's part of that 20% where there's that kind of divergence from an energy rating and an energy rating index and a CO2e rating index.
Yeah.
So the battery, there's some specific information that Verify would have to collect in the field, verify it against some specs and whatnot, and then they would take that data, enter it into a model. And just like it, again, it's a little bit extra
Mm,
data that they have to collect in the field,
mm.
but they're putting it into one software tool and it spits out two numbers. So you'll have your ERI or proprietary variation, and then your CO2e rating index. So
Yeah.
battery is going to affect the CO2e rating index if it's installed. And the other caveat, because there's always kind of a development
Yeah.
delay, if the software tools have those data fields to
Right,
enter it in.
right,
So
right, right, right.
that's always the other thing.
Lots of ifs there, but yeah, very cool stuff coming up. So yeah,
Mhm, mhm.
thanks for going over that.
Yep, absolutely. Now, when it relates to, hold on a second. When it relates to embodied carbon, we do have some tools. I'm sure everyone's heard of EC3 and Beam. Those are two very, very popular tools that help with product disclosures of embodied carbon of the products going into a house or dwelling unit. Um, there is an effort right now to create an ANSI standard to produce an embodied carbon index. I am part of I guess, an advisory committee on that. So it's in the early stages. Only had a couple meetings, but do keep an eye out for it. Just because I think the general goal is to create its own standalone ANSI standard for it. Um, I suspect it'll take at least a year to really get fleshed out and approved as an ANSI standard. And I also made a complicated motion to connect the CO2e rating index to that same new embodied carbon standard, so that we just have an energy rating standard, and then we have embodied and operational carbon standard. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Very early stages. Um, but it's pretty promising, I would say.
Yeah, and I'm curious because one of the obviously the biggest things is in everything we do is the tool overload, right? So now all these embodied carbon tools are coming and they're great, right? They help us make more informed decisions, but it's like one more data entry point. People are putting in their energy model data somewhere, and then they're putting in their data for the embodied model somewhere else. And so people have said, what if we, a lot of that information is the same. Will there ever be a point where you can put in, your wall assemblies and then it spits out, here's your operational, here's your embodied? I mean, do you think it will go in that direction?
That is my understanding of once the ANSI standard gets built out for embodied carbon. My hope would be that it's just you have a set of tools that of software tools that can do the calculation. So I'm sure the DOE, once it's an ANSI standard, I'm sure the DOE will create some kind of calculation engine that people can open source reference. And I know as it relates right now, there are several software tools, including our software partner, where we're looking at integrating with Beam and EC3, so that way we can get the data points that are relevant out of the software tool and through an API of some kind, or even if it's just a manual transfer of data, where you export an XLSX and then import it into a software tool or something like that. We're trying to bridge that gap right now. And the other thing too, to just keep in mind, what Beam and EC3 do are both different from like generating an embodied carbon index or operational carbon index or so on, because that's related to the actual product disclosure forms. And so that's a whole nother ball game that depending on whether or not you're a publicly traded builder or so on, those EPDs are gonna be necessary at some point for SEC disclosures and things like that, to avoid greenwashing and all that jazz. So I don't think EC3 and Beam are going to go away. If anything, I think that those tools for sure, and and others like them, are going to be really important when it comes to embodied carbon. And I think an embodied carbon index ANSI standard will potentially speed things up, especially if there's some kind of integration built in to help pull those EPDs out of the software tools to verify that. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but I hope I waxed poetically enough about it.
No, it answered mine. So if anyone else has one, but thanks.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and keep going. So let's see here. Boom, boom, boom. I think I pressed too many buttons. Want to make sure I'm on the right page. Okay, so just so we can clarify a little bit on how energy ratings and the CO2e rating index are generated, you basically have three general phases of construction. You've got your design phase, your construction phase, and your registration phase as it relates to energy side of things. In the design phase, you've got your documents that are drafted. You get mechanical equipment information, so manual J load calculation, manual S system selection, manual D duct design, that kind of thing. That information is provided to rating companies. Rating companies review it, enter it into a software tool, see if the project meets the requirements for that project. Then obviously in construction phase, goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways, they build the house and the inspections and tests are performed. And then at registration phase, in a home energy rating system, that's where you're finalizing quality management, you're verifying all the data that's been entered, collecting the paperwork, and then you're registering it with a registry. Now, I'll go ahead and say this. It is a very chaotic process for something that really matters a whole lot, because the integration, home energy ratings are one of those things where it bridges a bunch of gaps, right? So there's project compliance or program compliance for things like Energy Star, Dozer, Lead for Homes. There's energy code compliance, where as a mandatory requirement, you've got to hit certain blower door, and if you have ducts installed, certain duct leakage requirements, including in the 2021. I'll go ahead and say that that's It is a mandatory test item unless you're doing the total building compliance path. So even if you're ducted inside conditioned space or your thermal envelope, you are going to have to do a duct test. But it bridges a lot of gaps, or bridges a lot of different topics. And it's one of those things that, because it has so many fingers and so many pies, it gets really, really chaotic at times. So I want you guys to go ahead and put your feet in the shoes of a builder, small, medium, large, I don't care. Just put your feet in the shoes of a builder. Ask yourself, is the projected rating that you're getting from an energy rater accurate to the plans and specifications? Once they've done the inspections, is the data that is getting collected in the field and entered into the software tool actually accurate to the as-built structure? And then the last thing is, once that data is registered, is it actually correct and accurate to what was built? Right. So just high level issues. Now I'm going to go ahead and break it down a little bit into the design phase, construction, registration. And I want to talk about some of the very common things that I've seen in my time in the home energy rating system industry, right? Where data generation causes a lot of problems. So first thing, apologies if anyone is an HVAC contractor or designer, but maybe the manual J, S, and D are done. And if they are done, they're actually done right. That's a big pain point in creating accurate data. Just a brief example on that. I was reviewing a manual J load calculation. A client sent my way, asked for my thoughts. And luckily, RightSoft, I'm not here for product placement, but RightSoft does generate the Energy Star HVAC design report. So when you do your manual J, manual S, it'll auto-populate the fields and generate it. And if you look, they have specific threshold tolerances depending on your compressor type. And so you have a spot of 3 lines. It's very easy to see whether or not a project has an oversized HVAC system based on the compressor, and whether or not it even falls within the allowed tolerances. So in this specific instance, I was looking over the manual J and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, it seems a little oversized, but it is a big house in a desert. Okay, whatever. And I was looking at that. The system they had selected was delivering, I want to say it was 20% more than the maximum allowed oversized percentage. And they were trying to pass this off as, yeah, this is good. And so you have recommended ranges and allowable ranges. So when a manual J and S are done, that's great. But if they're not done right and they're not even complying with program requirements, you're going to have some issues. Second thing, this is unfortunately really, really common. Sorry if I'm going to air some dirty laundry here on the rating side of the business, but rating companies will take a plan and the specifications, and if they get the manual J, S, and D, so on, they'll incorporate that as well. But they'll take that and put it into 2 or 3 different software tools so that they can see whatever gets the lowest values. Whatever gets the best numbers. They're not doing it necessarily because that's the software tool that does the best job. They're just saying, okay, how can I get the best results using a software tool? Which frankly causes, me to question some things about why we have so many different software tools that all have different results. But, less said about that, the better. Another thing, and this is actually really important, is communication breakdown. Rating companies aren't always informed by the builder that a project has specific goals. So low-hanging fruit, a builder may say, hey, I want to do Energy Star. They hire a rating company and then just assume Energy Star gets done, right? Or Dozer just happens. And they never communicate it. And so I've seen it quite recently even, where there's just some kind of level of communication breakdown between the builder and the rating company, where the rating company is qualified to do the work and they can do all the tests and inspections, but the builder never told them, hey, by the way, this specific house, we're pursuing zero energy ready home, right? So that's something that you really need to consider. Next thing, The training for the energy modelers, the people who are banging out the reports, entering data in, maybe they're duplicating templates and things like that, it's variable. There's not truly a consistent single source of training when it comes to modelers, and frankly, even raters and other inspectors. So when it comes to the modelers, the reason this is important is they're going to interpret what they see on the plans and the specifications all differently. A couple of quick examples. You might specify a material and the modeler doesn't know any better to question it. If you guys follow Allison Bales on LinkedIn, yesterday or maybe the day before, he talked about reflective bubble wrap sheathing for deck systems and things like that. And that, they claim some really high R values for a material, but if frankly it's not accurate, right? Because it's not based on the material, it's based on an assembly, like he was saying. And so when you have a HERS modeler, or sorry, an energy modeler, I have to be specific, specifically generic, energy modeler that doesn't know when to question something, they're going to take a data point and they'll put it into a model, and you may not actually be getting an accurate rating of that project or projected rating. The other thing too is equipment efficiencies aren't always entered correctly, especially now with the transition from SEER 1 to SEER 2. Some manufacturers have gotten a lot of the products tested for SEER 2, HSPF2, COP2, or EER2, but that is still we're still in a transition phase. So if people don't even know what they're looking at, it causes some issues, frankly. The other thing too is it gets into this weird back and forth between a rating company and a builder. So let's say the rating company models the project and it doesn't meet the design goals. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, Energy Star. So they generate the results and it says, yeah, you're not meeting the target index, and the UA is a little bit too high to meet the backstop. And so they make some modifications, and then they take the modifications and they say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Builder, we have these recommendations. Well, these recommendations go into this dialogue where the builder pushes back and says, well, what if we do this? And the rater runs it and says, well, we're not quite there, so maybe we should do this instead. And it turns into this weird back and forth that sometimes takes a while, and it doesn't always happen, unfortunately, because some people just, again, don't communicate. In this specific example of a data generation issue, both parties are actually operating under a asynchronous state of information. So rating companies don't have any idea what builders are paying for things. And so they're making recommendations without any real care in the world for how much those recommendations may cost the builder, which we do need to consider to some degree, that when it costs so much to do something, builders are going to balk at it. And I mean, we see, we've seen this right now with North Carolina and the energy code requirements there. Builders can wield a lot of power. So you need to be aware of that. On the other side of it, builders have no idea how a lot of the software tools work, right? They're just assuming that the rating company they have contracted can and are doing the job right. Now, when you get into the construction phase and you're building the house, you do need to consider something that maybe, just maybe, the inspections aren't actually being done. That is a very worrisome event where, yeah, I mean, there are people who are pencil whipping and rubber stamping and just calling things good that have never been tested, never been inspected. Or maybe someone was on site and then they did, they call them drive-by ratings, or sometimes people just sit in the driveway for, 15, 20 minutes, call it good, and write down a number and drive off. That does still happen. And so that is I'm not going to say it's a common issue, but it is an issue that you need to be aware of, and we need to figure out how to mitigate that. And I will talk about that in a little bit. The other thing is you might run into what they call correct and proceed inspections, where people will walk around and they see issues with a project and they say, and they tag it correct and proceed, where they just assume that, maybe that crappy installation job is going to get ripped out and reinstalled, or they're going to fill in with the gaps in the foam with a spray can of foam or something. Who knows? But the big problem is when they do that, they don't always go back and check to make sure that that thing was actually fixed. And that causes some issues down the road. And then the next thing, when it comes to the construction phase, and this does happen a little bit more frequently than I care to deal with, but changes get made to a dwelling unit during construction, and then it's not communicated to a rating company or the verification organization, and they don't incorporate those changes and see whether or not that project still complies. So real brief example on that, there was a project that was built out, single story multifamily, kind of townhome-ish project, but not quite. During construction, they switched out all of their spec air source heat pumps to ACs with electric resistance furnaces, and then never communicated it to the rater, and then assumed they could still meet, tax credit rebate requirements, which I don't know if, I'm assuming everyone knows that you should not heat your house with a toaster oven. That kind of sounds silly, but unfortunately that still happens in some places. And then you get to the actual registration phase. So this is where the quality management is getting finalized. And what happens, unfortunately, is a project will get registered. Maybe changes weren't made during the construction phase of the model, and they just put in the test results and assume everything's good. They stamp it, they submit it, they register it. But that house didn't actually meet the requirements for a program or, even energy code sometimes. And then depending on your quality management system, that file, that energy model may not even be reviewed for another 3 to 6 months. So now you're looking in the rearview mirror at a project that doesn't comply with the program. And what are you going to do at that point? Are you going to go back to the builder and say, hey, this project, it didn't actually meet Energy Star, so we have to rip that label off the panel box. We have to go back into the house and do that. Unfortunately, I'll tell you that that does not happen frequently enough. Okay. So, and then the last thing is, because of all these issues, creating the data and generating it and putting it into a model throughout construction, at the end of the day, the outputs that you get are not useful because it's based on some fictionalized reality. And it's just not accurate to what was built. And so there's a certain level of risk associated with that that I don't necessarily feel comfortable with a lot of times. Now, I do want to touch a little bit on what's that data used for. You've gone through the construction process. After all those warts, right? They take that data, they use it for energy code compliance. They use it for tax credit compliance, which we will talk about in a little bit. Above code program compliance, and then depending on the corporate level, they do incorporate things into the ESG reports. So how did we address these challenges? And I'm going to kind of blanket statement some general recommendations that we've incorporated into our business model. So one thing that we really like to do is we actually do want to partner with builders so that they have full transparency from start to finish, having them see read-only access to the inspection data that gets collected to the energy model, so that there is a level of transparency that they can step in and say, hey, as this, I've seen it happen where builders stepped in and said, you're off on your conditioned floor area by 600 square feet. Who did the math, right? And so there's things like that when a builder has access, they can step in and they can make corrections and provide a little bit of insight that maybe rating companies are just not incorporating, right? It's a really good idea to integrate with tools that we have from other subcontractors, right? So if you can get data input from RightSoft, EliteSoft, to pull manual J and S to pre-populate some fields in an energy model, that's fantastic. And if you can pull in data from a company like MeasureQuick, where they're actually doing essentially ANSI 310 HVAC grading on a as installed system, fantastic, right? Get those integrations in place. Another thing, and I know there's a lot of back and forth debate about this, but I have a specific stance that I'll stick to, which is you really should just have a single calculation engine like the DOE funded NREL Energy Plus OSERI engine. There's no need for you to have multiple different calculation engines that your raters are going to turn around and play the game, right? You can enter the same house. Like I said earlier, you can enter the same house into 3 different software tools, you can get 3 different outputs. And that doesn't really make me feel comfortable. And it shouldn't make you feel comfortable either. Another thing, have a single place for training rather than 30 or 40 different training providers, because that creates a lot of inconsistency in how people are interpreting what they're seeing. And I'll go further. With the inspectors interpreting what they see in the field. I still see a lot of people that look at a central fan integrated system where they have a duct going to the return. Maybe it has mechanical damper and it just uses the inside air handler as the fan for fresh air mechanical ventilation. Well, they're looking at that and the fan wattage is outrageous. There's no way it can comply with energy code, let alone above code programs. It's not good anymore. Certainly it's not useful anymore. You should just have a dedicated fresh air supply of some kind if that's the mechanical ventilation solution you're going into, which I won't go too deep into that. So point being, even inspectors are having issues in interpreting what they see in the field because there's so much variation in training and quality of training. The other thing is make it clear from the get-go. Have some kind of, that's one thing I actually do really like about the LEED program is design charrettes, right? Make sure that everyone knows exactly what you're trying to accomplish on a project from the get-go, because the last thing you need is to assume you're just doing an energy code project. You do your blower door duct blaster, inspect insulation, call it good, and say, yeah, it meets code, sign the paper. And then the builder comes to you and says, hey, where's my Energy Star certification? That has happened and that shouldn't happen, because if you're pursuing Energy Star from the get-go, every person involved should know exactly what is happening. Another thing, when you have inspectors in the field collecting the data, they need to, as soon as they're done, be able to sync that data and update the energy model with the actual as-built field inspected data. Right? There should not be a delay. There should not be a PDF form that gets filled out and sent to a modeler who then takes that data in, because now you're looking at potentially 3 different stages of human error at the worst case, and potentially more depending on how complicated that situation is. Something else to consider, I mentioned this, if something gets found out to be it's not correct and proceed, right? You have to correct it. You should always require some process to verify that things have been corrected before they proceed. I have seen this where a low voltage guy, there's an insulation job, actually really good. Low voltage guy came in and dropped a line into a room, and to have room to drop his, 2-3 centimeter thick wire, he ripped out all the insulation in a cavity, and he dropped the wire in, put it in, and called it good. And he was sitting out in his van, about to build a builder for something. The builder came in, started complaining about the insulation contractor, right? So in a situation like that, if a rater came in, inspected, and goes, yeah, that's an issue, they need to be able to go back in a day or two or whatever, however long it takes to fill that cavity back up and verify that it's been corrected. And obviously the low voltage electrician should be back charged for screwing up someone else's work. So, that's kind of my take on that. Something else, and this is, unfortunately, the reality is before a project is registered and certified for some kind of program or even energy code, you need to assess whether or not it actually meets the requirements. And if it doesn't meet the requirements, just disqualify it from that program. You do need to take that hard stance, because especially now with stuff like the 45L builder tax credit that's tied to Energy Star and Dozer, which again, we'll talk about in a little bit, you're committing federal tax fraud if you let that through. That's the reality. Yeah, I don't like that. The other thing too is oversight shouldn't be a rear view mirror, right? Your quality management should be done throughout the process. So that way you can actually make sure that the inspectors are doing their job, modelers are doing their job. And then once it gets to the registration phase, if you've done your job proactively from the get-go, it should be as simple as pressing a button. You do not need to spend hours at end trying to review a project because you've already done all the work. So it should not be a rear view mirror. It shouldn't take 3 to 6 months to go back and look at projects. You should do it before you register a project. And frankly, because of all these consistencies that have been incorporated into the rating system, you can actually trust the outputs, right? You don't have to worry about whether or not someone was pencil whipping stuff because, hey, you actually have, geotag timestamp photos. All the modeling was updated as inspectors were completing inspections, so there's less opportunity for human intervention and human error. And you can, as you're doing quality management over the life of a project being built, you can actually have faith that, hey, it was actually inspected, things that need to be corrected were actually corrected, and you have a really good house at the end of the day, or dwelling unit. Now, let me see here. Perfect. I'm sure this is what most people are actually interested in. Apologies for talking for so long about everything else, but let's go ahead and talk about rebates. Specifically, I will be discussing the 45L builder tax credit. Everyone's already heard the new 45L has been extended for 10 years from January 1, 2023 to December 31st, 2032, if I got my dates correct. It does have 2 tiers. Energy Star is tier 1, Dozer is tier 2, and then it gets bifurcated between single family and multifamily. So there's different tiers within that. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify, because it even took me a second, that when you say Dozer, you're talking about the DOE's
Energy Ready Home. Yeah. So I talked to a builder in the Pacific Northwest, Ryan Shanahan, and he called it Dozer, and
just
for whatever reason it just stuck in my head. So blame Ryan. It's all his fault. I'm going to keep referring to it that way.
Maybe it's like, build a dozer if you don't want the bulldozer, right? Like, we're going to knock down all the non-zero energy homes.
Yeah. Hey,
that's not happening, but I'm saying, like, they'll all fall apart if you don't do this, right? So anyway, I'm trying to like associate it here, but I just wanted to let everyone else to know that, because I was struggling for a second, but
yeah, apologies. And the reason I remember it was my son watches a dinosaur robot cartoon, and there's a character there named Dozer. So it just happened. I had that conversation, and the cartoon was playing in the background, and it's just stuck in my head now. So now when it comes to Energy Star, there are only 4 organizations that are recognized by the EPA to provide that oversight for single family, and on the multifamily side for the ERI path, there are only 2. And so we have 2 that are nationally operating, excluding California, and then 2 that are specific to California. Single family projects, we'll talk about that. I'm going to take the stance, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. You should be certifying on the tier 1 for single family to Energy Star. You should actually be getting an Energy Star certification on your single family projects to earn the rebate. Program versions. This is probably the thing that a lot of people should pay attention, are these dates that I'm about to talk about. So for this year, through the end of 2024, projects need to be certified to Energy Star V3.1, or if you have a progressive state regional thing, I'm thinking, California obviously is California, the Pacific Northwest, Oregon and Washington, mix my states up there. They need to also be they need to comply with their specific program versions. Then starting January 1, 2025, projects need to comply with version 3.2, the national version 3.2 program. And the reason this is so important, and this date is like super specific here, is the tax credit is based on the transfer of ownership, not the permit date. So a lot of outside of the tax credit, if you're doing Energy Star, the version that you're getting certified under is based on your permit date and the implementation of that program version in your state. So that's kind of something that you need to keep in mind, because the program version switches 2025 to version 3.2, while you may have projects that the program version you're starting the certification under is version 3.1. And single family certified homes get $2,500 per dwelling unit. Because of that date that I just talked about a second ago, my general advice for single family builders is the projects that you're breaking ground on in a year, literally May, June, July, you need to be designing them and building them for version 3.2. And if you're not doing that now, you're going to be behind the curve because come January 1, 2025, you're going to sell a house that is Energy Star certified to version 3.1, but it doesn't comply with the tax credit. And that's going to be a huge curve between materials and manufactured products that if people aren't paying attention to that, they're going to get snookered, right? It's going to be a bad day.
Mm-hmm. Where does the Energy Star Next Gen program that's coming out come into play here? If I understand right, I know electrification is a big part of that, but where does that come in, or if at all?
So right now, it exists.
Yeah.
It's, to my understanding, not tied to the 45L. It's essentially kind of a interim step between Energy Star and Dozer. And there is it is electrification, big time, EV ready, things like that, heat pump water heaters, and then obviously heat pumps for AC. So there's a couple other things too, but yeah, that's they're kind of figuring out where that's going to play out. There is not explicitly another tier for Energy Star Next Gen, but we'll see when the IRS produces the rules. Maybe there will be. I don't know.
Yeah. I know there are some utility companies. There's one here in Michigan here soon that's going to append itself to Next Gen. So we'll be hopefully doing some education about that in the future. So.
Fantastic. Now, when it comes to the second tier, which is Dozer certification, from January 1, 2023 to the end of this year, not 2024, the end of 2023, single family projects have to be certified under version 1 of the Dozer program. And then projects sold on or after January 1 of 2024 have to be certified to Dozer V2 single family. And then obviously, if you're getting certified to Dozer, single family projects get $5,000 rebate. Okay. Now, why is that important? There are a few differences between version 1 and version 2. One of the biggest thing is the version of Energy Star that is referenced as a baseline requirement for Dozer certification. So version 1 references V3 3.1. And you can always go more restrictive, right? You can't go less restrictive. So it's V3.1 for version 1 of the Dozer program. But for version 2 of the single family, it actually references Energy Star version 3.2. So, I may have some bad news for some people. But if you're not basically breaking ground, if you have a project that's pursuing Dozer certification right now, and it's not actually designed to be, version 3.2 of Energy Star compliant, you're, behind the curve. And so that is something that you guys need to consider when you're communicating to clients, when you're designing projects. Make sure you have the version straight in your head based on the timeline, because again, it's not permit date, it's transfer of ownership date, and that affects everything differently because you're looking at the completion of a project, which can stretch out. There's some projects that I've seen under construction and certification for 3+ years. There's one lead project that it took like 7 years to be certified because it took so long to get so much information about it. The other thing is version 2 of the Dozer program requires HCOs. So all the federal programs, WaterSense, Energy Star, Indoor Air Plus, they're all shifting to a home certification organization structure where they have specific organizations that are recognized to provide that oversight. And version 2, the DOE is going to have Zero Energy Rating Home HCO specific for the program. That requires an application And right now, if you go to the Dozer website and you look at the page, it says approved DOE Zero Energy Rating Home HCOs. You don't actually see any listed. I do know that there are several that have applications in, and you know, obviously we're all kind of waiting with bated breath to, you know, see the announcements and see this go through. So there's kind of this gray area for oversight that is a little bit of an issue. Now, when it comes to multifamily, Energy Star MFNC projects, when they get certified either through the ERI path, prescriptive, or ASHRAE. And if you're doing prescriptive and ASHRAE path, you have to go through a multifamily review organization. Again, that is something that's listed on the Energy Star website, so you can look at that. But the baseline is $500, and then it goes up to $2,500 if you have a prevailing wage. Which, you know, so union wages. So I imagine a lot of projects down here in Texas are not actually getting that $2,500 back per unit. And then similarly, when it comes to the Dozer, which I do know that Dozer V2 specifically for multifamily is still kind of under construction. Program should be finalized before the end of the year. They're going to have $1,000 baseline, and then it does bump up to $5K if prevailing wages are met. Now, I mentioned this earlier, there is a little bit of an elephant in the room about the first tier, because the law that was passed, the language says something along the lines of the dwelling unit has to be eligible to be certified for Energy Star. And I know a lot of tax consulting firms are out there, you know, saying it doesn't actually have to be certified, it just has to be eligible to be certified. Generally speaking, I've taken the stance as the quality manager at BSI that you have to certify your project, right? But the IRS's final rules are going to get hopefully handed down sometime in Q4 of this year, and then we'll see. That'll settle all the debates theoretically. Unless there's some kind of challenges to the rulemaking process. But I do want to go ahead and just do a little bit of a thought experiment. Let's just assume IRS hands down the rules and says eligible to be certified means you have to verify that the project is actually eligible to be certified. You don't actually have to certify it. So let's assume that's what's actually allowed under the rules. When we're operating under that assumption, if you're going to verify that a project is actually eligible to be certified for Energy Star, you basically have to do like 98% of the work to do certification, right? You're going to have to look through the checklist for every single unit and every single project. So you're going to have to verify that those units comply with the program requirements, just like you normally would with certification. You're going to have to do basically all the paperwork that you would do under certification. So why wouldn't you just want to do, you know, the extra 2% of work to get a project actually properly certified and registered? So why would you want to have the risk associated with not actually certifying a project, but claiming it's eligible to be certified? So, you know, I know that there are a handful of tax consulting firms that's the stance they've taken is, yeah, it says eligible to be certified, but we're already going to have to do all the work anyway, so let's go ahead and just certify the projects. And then there are a lot of others that are saying, hey, it's just eligible, guys. It's just eligible. We don't actually have to certify it. And so, yeah, I don't care about dealing with the IRS. I've got a little bit of a libertarian streak in me, and the less federal oversight I have in my life, the better I feel. But yeah, that is something that is something that you need to consider. My recommendation again is always certify it. Don't bother with making it eligible to be certified. But if you are taking the stance that it's just eligible to be certified, to verify it, you're going to have to do 98% of the work anyways. So just certify it, right? Just do it. And yeah, that's basically it for me. And I want to say that's right at noon. So I think we filled in the hour, Brett, and we can now talk about all the questions and comments. And yeah, if you guys can't tell, I do like to joke a little bit. Tell me how wrong I am. I'm going to look at the chat real quick.
Yeah. Thanks, Connor. Well, for those of you who do need to get going, thank you for sticking around, and as long as you've been here the whole time, you're approved for your continuing ed. But for those of you who want to stick around a little bit longer, we're going to get into the Q&A. And before we get into the Q&A here, just a real quick reminder that if you want to rewatch this session, or you miss some of it, or you want to, some people share it out on social media, you name it, we'd be happy for you to head over to our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. You'll see it there, or you can subscribe and get instant access to it when it is available. For those of you who are watching this in the future, not right now, but on demand, head over to the Thinkific or USGBC platform, take your quiz with an 80% passing rate, and you'll receive your certificate. For those of you here live today, again, just a reminder, certs@gutenbergcerts.com, mark that as safe, and you'll be able to receive your certificate. And as always, we have to say a huge thanks to our board of directors, our volunteers, nearly 300 members we're trying to get to. I hope you can help us get there. And our executive director, Jose Reina, and all of our sponsors, especially our top tier sponsors who are going to help you get your energy ratings even lower, even better, you and your clients, Mitsubishi, Rheem, April Air for Healthy Homes, thanks to them. And everybody. So yeah, Connor, one of the questions that came up during the session was, we think about, like, again, we're talking about LEED is a sort of good, better, best, the best program, our Green Star program. But the DOE Zero Energy Ready program is, to my knowledge, more of a black and white program. And I have heard there are some variables now, especially under the new version, but can you just speak to that real quickly from what you're understanding under the new version?
Yeah, so I basically reiterate exactly what you just said. Version 1 was very black and white. You had a checklist, prerequisites. You literally just pull up the national program requirements, and as long as you met those prerequisites, and of course the builder was a builder partner with Dozer, the rating company was a rating company partner with Dozer, they'd be able to certify houses. Dozer. With V2, it does extend out, like, just checklist items. To give you an idea, I think it went from program requirements of being like 6 different, maybe 7 different sections to like 12 or 14. I can't remember the exact number right now. And there is also a just like Energy Star, a rating field check, a rater field checklist that has to be completed for version 2. Again, specifically, I'm talking about single family, since that's the one that is finalized. So yeah, there's more variability now under V2 than it was V1 for sure.
Okay. And then going back and again, consulting the 45L tax credit, there was a clarification here when you were talking about the transfer of ownership, because I know, if I understand right, some just person who's commissioning a home to be built and it really isn't going to be able to take advantage of this credit, to my knowledge. But there's got to be some sort of transfer of ownership. So their question was, that transfer of ownership, was it from the builder to developer or from the developer to buyer? And they said spec home, for example.
So what I'll say is my general understanding, and I'll make this clear, I'm not a CPA, I'm not a tax consultant, but my general understanding is the transfer of ownership would have to happen to a different entity. And so if the builder was building it and then sold it to the developer, my understanding is that would account for it. If the builder sold it to a homeowner, that would account for it. The weird thing is where you run into, I don't want to say owner operator, but you have someone who just builds their own house, which happens frequently in some states, and they build their own house and they want to try and get a rebate, but at the end of the day, they're not actually selling the house to anyone, they're just occupying it, right? Yeah, there needs to be some kind of transfer there. And I see Imran in the chat, and I'm sure he's got a better answer than that. But yeah, that's my understanding of it.
Okay. And what have you heard about, nonprofit agencies? I mean, I hear all different things. I mean, I just saw different comments here about whether that the Inflation Reduction Act has restructured 45L so that there may perhaps be a way they can benefit from it.
Mhm.
What have you heard out there?
Uh, what I've been hearing is that they can. I see this a lot with like CDCs,
Mm,
where or like Habitat Home affiliates and things like that.
mm,
United Way affiliates where they're building these structures. My understanding is it is something that they're going to be able to
mm,
access, but ultimately, we're all kind of operating under a haze, waiting for the IRS's final ruling. So,
mm,
you know, I hope, because I think it would be very beneficial for these organizations to be able to take
mm,
that, 2,500, $5,000,
mm,
and roll it back into their operating
mm,
costs,
mm,
and be able to more effectively deliver
mm.
housing for communities of need. But I just don't know.
Yeah. Um, Changing gears a little bit here, we're trying to more engage our realtor friends, the realtor community. We've got Meg here from
Hmm.
Earth Advantage, US Green, the US Green Building Registry. And so her question is, her comment slash question is, we've had requests for preliminary certification data. A builder's intent to build do a certain certification type, energy rating.
Hmm.
I've spoken with several entities that do certifications and energy ratings, and it seems as if that data isn't housed within the verification body. I
Hmm.
fully understand that things change during construction, and she said you had great examples of that. But do you have any thoughts on how to make this pre-construction certification energy rating intent data be available to the real estate marketplace? And so how does a builder market a home that they intend to achieve a rating?
Yeah. So there's a few things that I have to comment on that. Fantastic question. Thank you very much. The first thing is when we talk about the federal programs like Energy Star, Indoor Air Plus, and Dozer, and even WaterSense, um, we're not allowed to.
Hmm.
I, I don't want to say it that strongly. You can market yourself
Hmm.
as pursuing 100% Energy Star certification. You can say, hey, we're doing an energy rating on every house, pursuing Energy Star. You're allowed to say things like that.
Hmm.
If a builder had a design goal, and I'll make it very specific to our organization. I can't necessarily speak for the other National Energy Star HCO, but in our system, we have a way that when a project is first created, you specify the programs that it's going to be participating under, that you're pursuing certification for. And so we have that data from the get-go of a project being created. You don't really have that availability with all the other software tools, because it's kind of more of a shotgun
Hmm.
approach where they create the model and they just see, okay,
Hmm.
what does it meet, right? And sometimes the builders let them know ahead of time, sometimes they don't. But with our specific home energy rating system, that's something that we can do from the beginning of a project, and that's data that we could provide via an API, for instance. Wink, wink, nod, nod, Meg. Which we, I'll publicly say this. This isn't anything too crazy, I think, but that is something that we're getting in place soon.
Yeah.
Okay, I promise, Meg. I feel bad sometimes. But yeah, so there's absolutely a way to do it, but you're not going to be able to do that unless you have essentially a centralized home energy rating system. When you have so much of the oversight broken out between different companies and different software vendors, there's not a good way to do it. And I know there's efforts to do that, and there's a lot of money being funneled to do that, but it's going to wind up costing people money to access and share that data and things like that. So
Yeah.
that's something that we can do right now.
Uh,
And yeah.
yeah, well, that's great. And, I think about one of the reasons that I understand that people don't like these energy ratings, don't want anything to do with them, is that they feel like it's just a big mystery box, right?
Mhm.
Like they push out this information, some comes back, doesn't look quite right. And depending on the communication skills and level of the verifier, right?
Mhm.
Some communicate great, right?
Oh yeah.
And some communicate terribly, but they're very good at capturing information. So it's like you want them working on the projects,
Mhm.
right? But what I find is that people are just like, I don't trust those ratings. They're never accurate. it's just a big mystery box. So what it sounds like is maybe this is sort of opening it up so that perhaps the designer, the architect, the builder can kind of go and see what's going on, maybe make some comments, adjustments can be made. And I even think of the lead rater, who oftentimes isn't the energy rater. It's probably like 50-50. And it's even a mystery to them. And I say this, putting myself in my own frustrations here. I'm a green rater, but not an energy rater. I'm just like, what is going on out there? And I got to hound these verifiers down. But so it sounds like we could now maybe, through these kinds of, like this kind of idea, access this, see what's going on in real time, maybe say, oh yeah, they said that the U value is this, but they had a change order. Can you just update it here and see where it is? I mean, is that kind of where we're headed?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to have to, because there's a lot of money on the table. And again, I'll just tie it to the 45L. There's a lot of money on the table. If you look at, the number one by volume builder in the United States, the volume that they built at in, I think, 2022, we're talking about, $150 million. That is not a small amount of tax credits. Like that. That's more money. Well, that I was gonna say something really bad. That's more money than I'm probably gonna make in my lifetime. But that's something that they could earn back via a tax credit in a year. So on one hand, for me, as a tax-paying citizen of the United States, when it comes to these rebates, I get worried about, are the builders actually doing what they say they're doing? And do I have confidence in the process that these homes are actually certified to this standard? And I can say with some confidence that I don't actually feel confident because of these issues that we've experienced and we've seen. So I think you're going to have to, because at some point there is going to be major accounting for whether or not someone's falsifying information, whether someone has a library of photos that they're just recycling on inspections, and people are going to have to account for it. And frankly, the IRS could step in and shut down your business. And if a builder is participating in that level of fraud, even on a small level, smaller builders, I mean, good Lord, I don't think the feds would actually like that. I think that they'd be very upset. And as a tax-paying citizen, I'd be extremely frustrated with that. So I hope I answered your question.
No, yeah, and I really appreciate you bringing in the sort of the recourse here if this isn't done correctly. Like, in the past, it was just kind of a fun game to play, right? Like, let's do it. Now it's real dollars. I mean, I think of the low-income housing tax credit programs. They typically append themselves to Lead for Homes or Enterprise, which requires Energy Star. And that's millions of dollars. And we work on those projects, and we don't, if and people, they want to skirt by the sort of least they have to do on these projects, right? And in fairness to them, they have the budget, the money is stretched, right? So it's like they're skirting the line on the energy rating, right? It's like right there. And so if one thing changes, it pushes them over. And so we need to make sure that we're staying on those numbers from start to, the operational stage, before they submit the data to the verification body, and where's that at and what happened with that. So it sounds like this is just a really great way to do that, and sort of, just stay in communication. And I think you made it clear. I mean, you mentioned communication quite frequently, and I really appreciate that, because I find that to be one of the biggest hangups to achieving a lower energy rating or meeting the LEED energy performance, minimum performance with this tool. People are just not talking to each other. And so is there technology that can help us do that? And it sounds like, that is coming. So, following on that, and I want to go back to sort of your, and you still have some time to hang out?
Oh yeah, technically have all day.
Okay, all right. Well, we're gonna go all day. No, so going back to your statement on, or some of the mentions in the sort of design stage, and I'm curious what your thoughts and what you're seeing out there. Because, like, let's say your goal is an energy rating index of, just 50, let's say that, right? Like, how much in the design stage do the verifiers get coached on this? And do you see that you kind of want to overshoot a little bit, right, to put in a buffer? Like for example, if your target is 50, do you want to be at 45 in design? And I joke about this with LEED because it's like in design, you have a LEED Gold project. And then you come out of construction and it's LEED Silver.
Yeah.
Where did all the points go? They just poof in the air, right? It never
Yeah.
goes in the other direction. It didn't get
No.
more sustainable during construction.
Yeah.
The energy rating never gets more efficient during construction. So
Yeah.
like, what have you seen in recommendations, or what are verifiers trained on with that approach?
Well, and that gets to, I'll get to a few things, right? The big thing, it goes again to communication. And part of this is just kind of the structure of the different companies that are doing the work. So you might have an inspector that goes out and does an inspection, and they've been told prior to the inspection going out to them, this project is an Energy Star project. And so you need to verify these extra data points. Well, they go out there and they verify those extra data points. And then they, are filling out a PDF form. Maybe they have some kind of internal inspection software tool that is saving that data. And then that data is getting saved and it's going to the modeler. Well, that modeler may not actually update that model right there. At the end of the day, they may not do it for a week. They may not do it for months until the project's actually done. And there's been improvements to this. So I know that there's, I'll go ahead and say this. I'm not, promoting the software tool or anything, but like Ecotrope has Inspection Sync. And so depending on your API rate limits, you're able to update your model fairly quickly. We have we've from the get-go had something like that, although it's a little bit quicker, and it is not reliant on an API of any kind. It's just a single platform that updates the model based on the inspection data. But when that's updated, that isn't always communicated back to the builder, where we're saying, hey, we did the inspection and the inside and outside units don't match, and so you're not allowed, you're not actually getting 16 CO2, you're actually getting 14 and a half, right? And they're not communicating that. And the other thing too is sometimes HVAC contractors will switch out units and they don't tell the rater that, and then the rater can't verify. And so there's just a big issue of communication, period. And not always are the people in the field doing the work aware of how their work affects things downstream. And same thing on the builder side. A superintendent, I'm going to say something very strong here. Superintendents these days are basically just glorified schedulers. There are some that actually do their jobs well and do them right. But most of the superintendents I've encountered are just schedulers. They don't know a whole lot about actual construction or anything like that. So turns into, corporate might say, hey, this project needs to be so-and-so. And then the superintendent doesn't know how to incorporate that information. And so they just bring in the rater, and maybe they tell the inspector, oh yeah, this project's, Energy Star, so do whatever you need to do. And maybe that doesn't get communicated to the company, and now they're not actually billing for Energy Star, they're just billing for code compliance. So there's it's a crapshoot.
Well, and that kind of reminds me of something you had said, and I didn't even think about. And I'm not sure where you were placing this in the timeline when you were saying it, but I'm placing it now. Like you had mentioned, the low voltage electrician coming in, dropping a line, kind of messing up the insulation. Now, let's assume that the rater the verifier had already done the pre-drywall inspection, so they already marked that off, which is like kind of where I believe you were replacing that in the timeline. Yeah. So I'm thinking about if it's an Energy Star project or a LEED project pursuing the EA minimum energy performance, they're required to use that Energy Star builder management checklist, right? At least they're required to fill that thing out. It's and in theory, we're thinking that these GCs are going through and checking the insulation quality. And as you said, maybe pointed it out, went after the insulation contractor for it, even though it wasn't their fault, but they still caught it. Do you feel that is an effective way? And do you see that being implemented, that tool kind of being implemented as to help avoid those kinds of situations? And then communicate them back to the rater, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and it's tough because every single builder is going to have their own systems, their own processes. I would hope that whoever is the GC or super on a site cares about the product that they're building or that they're managing construction on. That was something that was beaten into me, and I'm joking. That was beaten into me at a very young age, which is, if you're building a house, if you're doing something that like that, you should build it so that you're proud that like even your mom would want to live in there. And that was something that my grandpa handed down to my dad, and dad handed it down to me. But that level of care just it doesn't actually really show up a lot of the times in a production environment. And so, on one hand, you've got the super that needs to know what they're talking about. And a lot of superintendents don't actually know anything about Energy Star. There isn't like a superintendent specific training program for Energy Star. Verifiers are required to go through a workshop and pass a test. HVAC contractors participate under an HQITO like ACCA or Advanced Energy. But builders, you have to have one person in your office that sits down and watches the builder introduction webinar. And then I think it's like annually after that, someone has to do that when there are program updates. But those things don't really get communicated down to the person who's actually managing the construction of the site. And so personally, I would love it if every single builder just opted to reduce the risk, because that's what it is. If reduce the risk and have a superintendent actually get trained in Energy Star, so they should know what to expect. And when it comes to, communicating to the rater, like, hey, I walked the house today and there was a cavity of insulation missing. Did you catch that? Right. Oh, well, I don't know. Let me go look at the photos. They go back and, timeline of events. Maybe they did the insulation inspection and then the low voltage guy came in. They can go back out and they can re-verify it. Right. And they say, hey, I'm 5 minutes down the road. I'm already in the neighborhood. Let me go check it out. I think that's fair. Right. At the end of the day, that's what we should all be worried about is, are we helping a eventual homeowner, home buyer, a person who's going to live in the multifamily unit? Are they going to have a comfortable, energy efficient dwelling that is safe for them, that is not going to, kill them, make them sick or anything like that? That's what we should be pursuing, right? It shouldn't cost a whole lot to live, right? I know it sounds bizarre, but it shouldn't cost a whole lot to live. And we should do our part in helping people have those safe environments that they can live in. So sorry, I went a little bit on a rant tangent. Apologies.
No. That's it makes a lot of sense. And one thing you brought up was the trainings that are provided to the verifier, the training to the HVAC, and it was intriguing. It's like there almost should be contractor trainings, and I know there's a lot of entities doing that. There's a lead credit for that nobody ever pursues, but because nobody has time for it. But I see the drawbacks to that not happening, and so I think I appreciate you sort of really showcasing the need for that. But I wanted to hone in on the HVAC side of things. I mean, when this all started, when Energy Star started sort of turning their attention under version 3 to the HVAC contractors, and they had this vision in their head that they would all get certified and all do great evaluation work. Well, that never really seemed to materialize, at least, especially not here in Michigan, for sure. And so it seems like now they're sort of pulling back and they're trying to put all this onus onto the verifier under what is now called the ANSI 310 standard. And if I understand correctly, the verifiers can go through and actually do additional, they're already there doing so many things, right?
Yeah.
So it's like they're doing some additional evaluation. And we're going to be doing some sessions with Energy Star and some others coming up live, even next week on this. But they're doing some additional evaluation of the HVAC system, commissioning of it, and really taking that onus away from the HVAC contractor. Not saying they shouldn't be held responsible for design and proper install, but saying, hey, it's probably not likely that you're going to get a credential anymore. You're not going to spend time doing that. Let's just put it on the verifier to do it. Are you seeing success with that? Do you see that that is a good direction to head into, or what are your thoughts there?
I think there are. I'm gonna try my best to not sound like a glass half empty kind of guy. I think there are some challenges associated with the ANSI 310 standard. Primarily, it's going to be related to, do you have sufficient training for the verifiers to do the actual verification? Depending on the HCO that the verifier is certified under, it may be as simple as you watch 3 or 4 hour-long webinars, and then you go do an ANSI 310 verification field training with someone who also watched those same 3 or 4 webinars. There may be actual field training. I don't know, right? There's a lot of variability on the actual training aspect of ANSI 310. So there's some challenges there. I do know that there are some verification organizations. I'll go ahead and shout them out. PEG on the East Coast. They're doing a lot of ANSI 310 verification and HVAC grading, and good on them. I think the last thing I heard was they're expected or projected to do like 20,000 this year. So you consider that. I think that's great. And I do think that there are a lot of benefits to it, but on the challenges front, are the verifiers actually capable? Do they have a good understanding of what their responsibilities are? Because it ranges from design review to actual field testing. And then that's another thing to consider. If you're like in Texas, if you're not a licensed HVAC contractor, guess what? You're not allowed to mess with an HVAC system. Now, that is why they have non-invasive testing procedures baked into ANSI 310. But if you're going to be going out in the field, you now have to invest in some extra equipment that you may not already have, which is just going to increase your costs associated with things. And then you've got to go, okay, am I only going to have one person do them, or am I going to have multiple? How many sets of this gear am I going to have to buy? And this is why, another reason why, frankly, when MeasureQuick has shown up, just to shout them out again, MeasureQuick actually helps the HVAC contractors do the HVAC grading. So you can get a lot of data out of MeasureQuick based on the actual as installed system. And I think that's a wonderful thing, to where you've got kind of like how we have an integrated platform where you've got your tests and inspections all baked in, and it's flowing into the energy model. MeasureQuick side, they have all these remote testing equipment that they can do all the tests automatically with their app, pull that data in from those tools and generate reports. And I think and get that data. It's a very powerful, and I know ACCA has a partnership with them. So, I'll broadly say this. I do recommend, I prefer HVAC contractors making sure that their stuff actually works. Belt and suspenders wise, I also think it's not bad to have a third set of eyes looking at stuff. But when you're able to get technology to do what technology does best and cut out humans, where humans can make a mistake, I think that's really solid. And this is kind of allows me to answer this question that Manny put in, which is, thoughts on info spit out by, AI sites like ChatGPT. I mean, I don't know what I could necessarily add to that. ChatGPT is really powerful, but just like any software tool, it's only as smart as the inputs. And so I've played around with ChatGPT and I've gotten some really, really cool stuff. And then I've gotten some really dumb stuff because the inputs just suck. And that's kind of the same thing on the energy rating side. Someone has crap data, they put it into a software tool. It doesn't matter how good the software tool is if the data that got put into it is garbage, and your outputs are going to be garbage. So, it's interesting. But yeah, I don't know.
I think of the day where you put in bad data and whatever variation of energy audit Chat GPT exists, it says, Well, are you sure that's the U value of your wind? I just don't think that's what it is. Go take a picture of it. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And it's like talking with you, you know.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of funny because we have things like that baked in to our system
Right.
right now, right?
Right.
Where you've got these data validity checks that are going in. And I know that there are some organizations internationally that even just on like
Yeah.
air tightness testing, I'll say this, air tightness testing in the UK, there's an organization that when someone does a blower door test on a dwelling unit, I think the guy told me something like 1,000 data points are verified. Right.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. Let
Yeah.
technology work for us, right? Don't make it difficult. I
Right.
don't know what else to say, right?
Right.
So
Yeah. Well, Connor, we went over a little bit, but I really appreciate you hanging out and just chatting. I love just chatting the challenges and opportunities of the rating world, and hopefully everyone else sticking around had a good time doing that too. And so on that note, where can people go to get more information, learn more? I understand you're helping train verifiers, even verifiers perhaps, in other countries who want to implement the LEED standard and need to do these things. Where can people go to learn more?
yeah, you guys can all visit our website, buildingscienceinstitute.org. You can harass me. I put up I had my contact information up. Feel free to harass me. Unfortunately, I do pick up the phone. So if you call me, don't expect to get a voicemail unless I'm holding a baby and getting yelled at or something. So, otherwise I'll pick up the phone. Those are the best places to look at us. I do generally recommend people look at resources that are available to them. You have Building America Solution Center, where you can get a lot of really good program guides on Energy Star, Dozer. We talked about, I do want to touch base on this super quickly. We talked about training for contractors. You have companies like Construction Instruction and On3. Both of those are incredibly fantastic organizations. I highly recommend that if you're a builder or you have clients that are builders, go send them to those people, right? And they're similar, but they're also different. So have them, recommend have them go do that, because if you can get the builders to be trained up, they can all help make sure that the dwelling units being built are not trash. And like, I know that sounds like such low-hanging fruit, but I mean, I've walked into houses where it seems like the builder is trying to kill the person who's living there, right? Where you've got an atmospherically vented furnace inside the house and an exhaust-only solution for ventilation. So
I forget whose rule was it. Maybe it was Carl down there in Atlanta. Number one rule: don't kill your clients. Right? That was like number one rule of green building. Yeah, good points, Connor. Well, hey, appreciate you hanging out with us, and again, happy 1-year anniversary to Building Science Institute. So take care, everyone. Have a good week. We'll catch you next week for our final session in May. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
Be sure to check out all of our courses available online that you can watch anytime and anywhere to pick up your CEUs. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube to get weekly updates and stay up to date on green building science courses, webinars, and home tours. Thanks again.